Millionaire opened the door of the dark storage room and froze at the scene. There, on the cold and dirty floor, his little daughter cried inconsolably. Between sobs, she murmured, "I can't eat anymore." In her trembling hands, she barely held a bowl with food remains, while the stepmother's sharp voice thundered like a whip. "Eat it all right now." Tears ran down the girl's cheeks. Her throat closed up, unable to pronounce another word, and just when the silence seemed unbearable, the father's figure appeared in the doorway, and everything changed forever. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Before beginning, tell me at what time and from which country you're watching this story. In Boston, spring unfolded over the golden facades and alleyways that led to Faneuil Hall. However, behind the walls of the historic brownstone house, the air was still, as if time refused to advance. Mr. Alejandro Valverde returned from a business trip unexpectedly. He had gotten out of the car with firm steps, letting the echo of his shoes resonate in the interior courtyard covered with old brick. On his face mixed exhaustion with a secret expectation. At least for an instant he had imagined that upon opening the door, his daughter Marina would run toward him. The memory of his late wife continued weighing like a shadow. That woman with whom he had shared youth and dreams had died in an accident he still blamed himself for. In silence he had built a real estate empire, but each brick reminded him of what he had lost. He tried to fill the void with work, with trips, with accounts in order. However, he knew no wealth erased the silence that inhabited his house. Upon leaving the suitcase next to the stairs, Alejandro heard his own steps bounce on the cold marble. No trace of Marina's laughter, no spontaneous hug. He took off his jacket and placed it carefully, as if that ordered gesture could hide the stab in his chest. The stillness was so intense that even the wall clock's tick-tock seemed too loud. Isabel Cortez appeared then from the hallway in a light-toned dress and a measured smile. "Alejandro, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you until the weekend." Her voice was melodious, soft as honey, but with an undertone only perceived when one knew how to listen. He responded with a slight gesture, avoiding showing unease. "And Marina?" he asked, searching with his gaze over Isabel's shoulder. The woman approached delicately and caressed his arm. "She's surely in her room reading. You know, sometimes she locks herself in with her notebooks." Alejandro nodded, though something inside him didn't quite fit. He had been absent several weeks. He knew well his daughter's habit of running toward him despite her difficulty speaking. This time not a murmur, not a step. He tried to convince himself the trip's exhaustion was playing a trick on him. He walked through the hallway observing the family portraits. Marina's innocent gaze in the photos contrasted with the lack of her presence now. The memory of when she, still small, handed him a clumsy but colorful drawing pulled a sigh from him. That distance between what was and what he now lived pressed on his chest. The sunset covered the city with a golden veil, but in the house the shadows thickened. Alejandro opened a window to let in fresh air and heard the city's bustle. Street musicians tuning guitars, tourists leaving coins on a cafe terrace table, waiters clearing plates with the typical, "Thank you, sir." It was a living world out there, and yet, inside his own home, everything seemed dead. He headed to the library, a place he had always considered refuge. He ran his hand along the book spines, seeking to calm himself with the familiar texture of old leather. He tried to convince his mind everything was under control, that Isabel cared well for Marina. After all, the woman had shown friendliness toward neighbors and kindness in public. Why doubt now? Suddenly, a metallic noise interrupted his thoughts, a sharp blow coming from the back garden. Alejandro tensed, looked at Isabel, but she seemed not to have heard it. She excused herself with a light smile. "I'm going to change clothes," and disappeared down the hallway. Alejandro remained standing, his heart racing. That vibration wasn't the result of wind. He knew well the house's sounds, and that door slam didn't correspond to any poorly closed window. The noise repeated like the echo of a heavy door closing forcefully. His skin crawled. The house's silence breaks with a distant murmur, almost a sob. It's Marina's voice in the darkest corner of the historic house. The air smelled of humidity and confinement. Alejandro advanced with contained steps toward the old storage room door, guided by that metallic noise still resonating in his mind. The wooden gate, worn by years, let escape a muffled murmur, He leaned in, holding his breath, and heard a sob. His heart gave a leap. He pushed the door suddenly, and the scene paralyzed him. Marina, his daughter, was huddled on the floor with trembling hands, holding a bowl with cold food remains. She had eyes swollen from so much crying, cheeks reddened by fear. In front of her, standing, Isabel Cortez pointed with her finger at the soup spilled on the floor. Her voice, cutting like a knife, bounced off the storage room walls. "Eat it all, or would you prefer to spend the night locked in here?" Marina tried to bring a piece of hard bread to her mouth, but her hands didn't respond. Isabel clicked her tongue and pushed the bowl with the tip of her shoe, spilling even more liquid. "You're useless. Even a pig would eat faster." The girl shuddered without raising her gaze from the floor. Alejandro felt rage rise up his throat like a contained roar. "Stop, Isabel!" His voice thundered in the shadows. The woman turned brusquely, surprised. For an instant, her mask broke, but she soon recovered control, feigning weakness by placing a hand on her belly. "Alejandro, you scared me. I just wanted the girl to eat. You don't understand how difficult it is with my condition." Alejandro frowned. "Your condition?" She averted her gaze and muttered with a calculated tone. "I'm pregnant. 2 months." The words remained suspended in the air like an uncomfortable veil. Alejandro clenched his fists, incapable of responding immediately. The echo of the revelation stunned him. A child on the way. Was it true or just a maneuver to cover up her cruelty? Marina, meanwhile, remained on the floor. Her lips trembled, incapable of articulating a sound. Slowly, with a fragile finger, she drew a word in the dust. "Help." Alejandro saw it, and a knot tightened his throat. His daughter, that girl who couldn't express herself with voice, had found a way to cry out for help. With a brusque gesture, he leaned down and lifted her in his arms. Marina clung to his neck, hiding her face in his shoulder. Her body was pure trembling. Isabel took a step forward, but Alejandro stopped her with a hard look. "Don't ever speak to her like that again." The woman lowered her gaze, feigning tears that didn't flow. Upon leaving the storage room, Alejandro felt the afternoon's fresh air hit his face. He walked with his daughter in his arms to the kitchen, trying to calm her. There he placed Marina in a chair and caressed her tangled hair. "You're with me now, little one. Nothing's going to happen to you." She raised her shining eyes, and though she couldn't pronounce a word, the spark of hope flickered in her gaze. Isabel appeared shortly after, carrying a tray with cut fruit. "I've been impatient, I admit it. It's the hormones. You know how we women are in this condition." Alejandro didn't respond. He limited himself to observing how Marina pushed away the apple pieces without touching them. During dinner, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Isabel smiled and caressed the girl's hair as if nothing had happened. But Marina lowered her head each time her stepmother's hand approached. Alejandro, with his fork motionless, swallowed bites with difficulty. Each clink of silverware against porcelain sounded like a blow in the silence. Clara Jimenez, the young house employee, collected plates in silence. Her eyes met Alejandro's for an instant. In them shone a flash of concern, but she quickly returned her gaze to the sink, aware that any imprudent word could cost her the job. When dinner ended, Isabel leaned on Alejandro's shoulder. "I don't want you to misinterpret anything. I only want peace in this house." He moved away gently without saying a word. The echo of that mute plea written in the dust accompanied him like an interior bell. That night, after putting Marina to bed in her room, Alejandro remained a long while leaning on the door. The yellow lamp illuminated the girl's tired face. Her eyelids fell slowly, but even in sleep her expression was of fear. Alejandro pressed the doorframe so hard his knuckles turned white. Hours later, while trying to read in his study, he heard a creak in the hallway. He got up and advanced slowly. His breathing stopped upon seeing Isabel gently dragging Marina by the hand. The girl walked with her head down, feet dragging, heading back toward the old storage room. Alejandro remained motionless, blood frozen. He wanted to intervene, but a strange fear stopped him. What if Isabel turned the situation against him? What if he couldn't prove anything? The storage room door closed with a dry squeak, leaving behind an unbearable silence. Alejandro rested his forehead on the wall, feeling cowardly, feeling he had failed again. The house's silence breaks with a distant murmur, almost a sob. It's Marina's voice. The sun began to fall over Faneuil Hall in Boston, tinting the facades gold and filling the cafe terraces with life. Waiters moved from table to table with trays full of cups and glasses, while tourists raised their cameras to capture the instant. In the midst of that bustle, Alejandro Valverde sat at one of the terraces trying to take refuge in the intense aroma of freshly brewed coffee, but his mind found no rest. The images of the storage room continued pursuing him. Marina huddled on the floor, the word help written with a trembling finger. Alejandro passed a hand over his forehead and breathed deeply. Guilt bit him in silence. He had returned from the trip with the hope of reuniting with his daughter, and what he had found was an abyss of fear. He wondered how he hadn't seen before what was happening inside his own house. While he distractedly stirred the coffee, a childish voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Sir, buy a lottery ticket." He looked up and found himself with a girl about 12 years old. She wore a simple dress and a frayed shawl, and in her hands held a fan of wrinkled tickets. Her eyes were dark, large, full of a liveliness that seemed strangely familiar. Alejandro at first refused with a gesture like someone rejecting an automatic offer. But when the girl insisted, barely inclining her head, something in her face stopped his hand. There was an indefinable resemblance, a distant echo that shook his heart. "Give me one," he finally said, taking out some coins from his pocket. The girl smiled gratefully and handed him a ticket. While he searched for change, she took from her shawl pocket a piece of folded paper. It was a photograph worn by years. Alejandro looked at it and felt the air stop. In the image appeared a young woman hugging a man, and that man was himself, 20 years ago. The girl observed his reaction attentively. "My mother always kept this photo," she whispered. "She said my father lived here in Boston." Alejandro froze. The coffee trembled in the cup between his hands. He tried to say something, but words got stuck in his throat. The woman's figure in the photo returned to his memory. A youthful love that had disappeared from his life abruptly, without goodbyes. He never knew such a deep trace had remained. At that moment, a familiar voice interrupted his attention. "Mr. Alejandro." It was Mrs. Mercedes Ruiz, his neighbor from the adjacent street. She carried a bag with freshly baked bread and greeted with her usual cordiality. "What joy to see you here. And how lucky you are with Isabel, always so attentive. Also valued in the neighborhood." Alejandro forced a smile, thanking her words. Mrs. Mercedes didn't perceive the knot tightening his throat and continued on her way. The girl, on the other hand, remained standing before him with the photograph extended between her fingers. "What's your name?" Alejandro finally asked. "Inez Herrera," she responded with a firm voice, though in her eyes appeared a nervous gleam. "My mother spoke to me about you before dying. She told me one day I would find you." Alejandro lowered his gaze to the lottery ticket, and then to the photo. The resemblance in the girl's features became more evident the more he observed her. The shape of the nose, the mouth's gesture, even the way of holding the gaze. His chest filled with a mixture of bewilderment and fear. For a few seconds, the entire square disappeared for him. He no longer heard the musicians' guitars or the tourists' laughter. He only saw Inez standing before him, like an unexpected mirror of his own past. Inez pressed her lips and took a step closer. "I'm not looking for money, sir. I just want to know if it's true." Alejandro swallowed, his mind spinning. He couldn't respond lightly. The possibility that girl was his lost daughter overwhelmed him. He looked again at the photo. Himself, 20 years younger, smiling next to that woman who had been his hope and who disappeared without leaving a trace. His heart pounded in his chest like a runaway drum. He tried to calm himself, but the trembling in his hand gave him away. Alejandro's heart beats wildly. Could his own lost daughter be standing before him? The sunset painted the city walls orange, while Alejandro walked restlessly through the historic house's interior courtyard. Inez's photograph still burned in his pocket like proof he didn't dare look at too long. What if it were true? What if that girl was the fruit of a past he had wanted to forget? Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, and recognized in it familiar gestures, like an echo that pursued him. That afternoon, he decided to take a walk with Marina, trying to find respite in the midst of confusion. He took her to the public garden, that park overlooking the Charles River from where the city skyline could be seen. The cherry trees were, in bloom, and couples strolled hand in hand while tourists photographed the romantic swan boats. Marina, timid, sat under a tree with her drawing notebook. Alejandro kept at a certain distance, observing how his daughter moved the pencil with concentration. Her usual silence had become denser since the last time in the storage room. From time to time, she raised her gaze and looked around as if fearing someone would surprise her. When she finished, she closed the notebook abruptly, but Alejandro reached it before she could put it away. On the page appeared a closed door painted with red pencil. Above, in clumsy letters, read a single word: help. Alejandro felt a chill run down his spine. The same mute plea, now repeated with greater clarity. He knelt beside her and took her small hands. "You're not alone, Marina. I promise you." She looked at him with moist eyes, incapable of pronouncing a word, but her fingers clung tightly to her father's. When they returned home, Isabel waited for them in the entrance hall. Her smile was impeccable, as always when there were witnesses around. Upon seeing the notebook in Alejandro's hands, she arched an eyebrow. "Children draw so many silly things. Don't you think? It's not wise to give them too much importance." Alejandro held her gaze without responding. Later, in the kitchen, Clara Jimenez cleaned the table in silence. Alejandro noticed she glanced sideways at the notebook, as if recognizing in it something she didn't dare say. He thought of asking her, but Isabel appeared immediately with a tray of pastries for the afternoon snack. The air tensed. In private, Alejandro tried to confront Isabel. "I won't tolerate Marina living in fear." She, without losing composure, brought a hand to her belly and responded with a honeyed voice. "You should think about the child I'm expecting. Your distrust will only bring misfortune to this house." Her phrase fell like a disguised threat. Alejandro felt rage rise to his throat. Isabel, seeing he remained silent, leaned toward him and whispered with venom, "If you talk more, you'll lose everything you love." Then she turned with a fake smile and went out to the patio, as if nothing had happened. That night, Alejandro locked himself in his study, opened Marina's notebook, and left it on the table next to Inez's wrinkled photo. Two different proofs, two cries that met in his conscience. The image of his daughter in the garden, drawing with trembling hands, hit him hard, and Inez's smile in Faneuil Hall holding that photograph wouldn't let him sleep. He brought his hands to his face and whispered, "I can't stay silent anymore." Alejandro closes his study door forcefully, holding Marina's drawing in his hands, and murmurs, "I can't stay silent anymore." The morning dawned gray in Boston with heavy clouds over the Golden City. The Suffolk County Courthouse building stood solemn on Congress Street, its stone walls imposing a respectful silence among those waiting at the entrance. Alejandro arrived early, dressed in a dark suit. At his side, Marina walked with her head down, holding in her hands a folded sheet with a drawing. Inez was also there, accompanied by Mrs. Mercedes, who offered her words of encouragement. Alejandro's heart beat as if it would break his chest. Inside, the courtroom soon filled with muffled murmurs. Judge Carmen Salazar presided with a serene expression, observing each one with firm eyes. To her right, Attorney Javier Ortega prepared folders and documents. To the left, Isabel Cortez appeared impeccable in a sober dress and defiant gaze. Behind her, Rodrigo Montalban, the hired lawyer, displayed a stack of medical reports, and Dr. Fermín Aguilar occupied a reserved seat, ready to testify the girl suffered from a psychological disorder. The session began. Rodrigo spoke first with a measured voice. "Your Honor, my client is in an advanced state of pregnancy and has shouldered the burden of raising Marina. The girl shows clear symptoms of isolation, inability to communicate, and self-destructive behaviors. What we see here is an illness, not abuse." Isabel sat there, theatrically bringing her hand to her belly as if protecting a non-existent life. Attorney Ortega then stood up. His voice was grave, but without needing to raise it, imposed respect. "With all due respect, Your Honor, what we have here is not a disorder, but the silent testimony of a girl." He walked to the evidence table and lifted Marina's drawing, a closed door, and the word help, written with clumsy but decided stroke. The paper crinkled in the room, and a murmur ran through the audience. Judge Salazar observed the drawing carefully and then leaned toward Marina. "Is this yours, child?" The girl nodded silently, and with trembling hands slid another sheet. It was the one she had kept so carefully. A dark storage room, a female figure in a red dress, and an enormous padlock on the door. Her moist eyes fixed on her father's. Alejandro stood up without being able to contain himself. "Your Honor, this girl has been mistreated in her own home, and not only her." He turned to the audience. "There's another truth I can no longer silence." He made a sign. The girl breathed agitatedly, but with courage took from her pocket the old photograph and showed it high. "This is my mother, and this man at her side is him. Alejandro Valverde, my father." A heavy silence fell in the room. All eyes settled on Alejandro, who felt his strength abandoning him. Even so, he took a step forward, hugging both girls at once. "Yes, they are my family, and I won't allow them to live one more day in darkness." Isabel hit the table with fury, forgetting her mask. Rodrigo tried to calm her, but the judge raised her hand, imposing silence. Inspector Morales, who until then had remained in the second row, stood up and handed the judge a device with audio recordings. Isabel's voice insulting Marina, calling her useless and threatening to lock her up. Upon hearing it in the room, several attendees lowered their heads with indignation. Dr. Aguilar, called to testify, tried to justify his report, but Attorney Ortega cornered him with direct questions. "Have you ever seen the girl in person?" The man hesitated. "No, I only based it on Mrs. Cortez's descriptions." The judge arched her eyebrows. "Then your report lacks value." The atmosphere became more intense. Mrs. Mercedes asked to speak as a neighbor, telling that many times she heard muffled crying in the house, although Isabel always excused them as special therapies. And Clara Jimenez, the employee, stood up in tears. "I saw her locked up 3 days in a row. I was afraid of losing my job, but I can't stay silent anymore." The judge kept silent for a few seconds while the tension could be cut with a knife. Then she leaned toward Marina. "Child, do you want to say something more?" The girl slowly raised her paper and wrote with uncertain handwriting, "I trust my father." Alejandro leaned toward her with tears appearing in his eyes. Attorney Ortega closed his argument with a firm voice. "We're not just talking about evidence, we're talking about humanity. These girls deserve a home without darkness." In the room, breathing was unanimously held. The judge gently struck the gavel. "The court will deliberate, but I anticipate the protection of these minors will be immediate." Isabel stood up abruptly, red with rage, and shouted, "This won't stay like this." Rodrigo tried to stop her, but the judge ordered the courtroom officers to keep her under control. Alejandro, for his part, hugged Marina and Inez tightly, feeling that despite the fear, he had crossed the point of no return. Isabel cornered shouts in the middle of the courtroom. "If I fall, you'll also lose everything, Alejandro." The Suffolk County Court's sentence brought immediate relief. Alejandro obtained full custody of Marina and Inez, while Isabel had to stay away from them. Upon leaving the courthouse, the cold spring air in Boston felt like a new life. The following days were different. The house, once full of fear, began to fill with simple gestures. Clara continued working with serenity. Mrs. Mercedes stopped by with sweets and words of encouragement, and Alejandro accompanied his daughters to school, discovering that routine could also be a gift. With Marina, he learned sign language at night, clumsy at first, but happy to see her smile each time he corrected his hands. Inez brought vitality, telling stories of her mother and painting with colors the hallways that were previously silent. Easter arrived, Boston's streets filled with spring flowers and church bells. In Faneuil Hall, among musicians and candles, Alejandro hugged his daughters. Marina raised a notebook and wrote, "I love you, Dad." Inez added below, "Me too." Alejandro surrounded them with his arms, feeling that at last the darkness remained behind. Back home, he hung 2 memories, Marina's drawing with the word help and the photo Inez had brought. 2 symbols of what they had lived through, now converted into light. That night, at the simple kitchen table, he raised his glass and smiled. "Let's toast to what we have, a home without fear." In the midst of Easter celebrations, Marina made a clear gesture with her hands. I'm safe. Alejandro responded in the same language. Me too. In the calm of that last night, after so many tears and silences, an image remained engraved. A father who learned to listen with his heart, and two daughters who could finally feel safe in their own steps. Boston continued with its Easter celebrations with flowers and bells, but inside the historic house, another kind of light was lit, that of a home without fear. Dear listeners, if this story has moved you, write a 1 in the comments, and if you believe something could be improved or it hasn't reached you completely, leave a 0. Your voices are part of this shared path. The lesson it leaves us is clear and simple. Love, when authentic, has the strength to repair what seemed broken. Redeeming past mistakes doesn't erase pain, but opens a new path where affection becomes foundation. A family isn't measured in wealth or titles, but in the certainty of knowing nobody sleeps in fear. Like a lamp lit in the window in the middle of the night, a single gesture of tenderness can illuminate the darkest root and guide those who believed they had lost all hope. In real life, perhaps we don't face trials or great revelations, but we do have every day the opportunity to extend a hand, to listen, to give a place at our table. And that opportunity, however small it may seem, changes entire destinies. In the end, what remains isn't business, nor pride, nor appearances. What truly sustains us is family, recovered trust, the certainty that someone waits for us at home. That's why it's worth stopping, even for a moment, to think about those we have near and ask ourselves, have we made them feel safe, loved, protected? If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone you want to remind they're not alone. Perhaps with that gesture we'll light more lamps in our people's homes, because happiness isn't found in living for oneself, but in learning to live for others.